Okay. Oh, wait, do I need to hit something? No, we're good. Okay. Crystal is a tea drinking, book hoarding history nerd. Her award winning stories are ripe with history, danger, love, and hope. When not writing, Crystal can be found playing board games with her husband and boys, caregiving for loved ones, hiding in a book, drinking copious amounts of hot tea, or connecting with readers. You can connect with her on her website, Caudill.com, or by joining her newsletter crew. And those links can be found on the StoryFest page as well under their bios. And Crystal's featured book tonight is Counterfeit Love. Crystal, did you give us away? Okay. Sarah, did I see you, Sarah? Boy, this is hard to do with everybody. Whoops. Oh, Sarah's up at the top. Okay. Hi, Sarah. Sarah Hanks is an award-winning author of Christian fiction in both the contemporary and historical genres. After spending over a decade mostly writing and teaching Sunday school curricula for churches in her community, she finally jumped into writing fiction full-time. She and her husband had 8 children of their own, a couple of whom seem to have inherited their mother's love for playing with words and crafting stories. Though Sarah dreams of a cabin by the beach, the family of 10 lives jammed together in beautiful chaos near St. Louis, Missouri. She buys earplugs in bulk.
True story.
And Sarah's featured book is Mercy's Legacy. Can you guys hear me all right? Because I don't have the headset thing. I'm just using whatever on my laptop here.
Yes, Tracey, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Thank you. Next up is Izzy James. Izzy grew up on the Chesapeake Bay in coastal Virginia. She lives there still with her one true love in a house brimming with books. When she is not writing, she is reading, knitting, and spinning fiber into yarn. Izzy would be delighted to hear from you. Sign up for her newsletter on her website, echull.com. And Izzy's featured book is Rita. Lynn Tagawa, did I say your name right, Lynn? Okay, good. Lynn is an educator, writer, and editor who loves coffee and chocolate. Best of all, she's grandma to 5, author of Sam Houston's Republic and the Shenandoah, I said that wrong, Shenandoah Road. First in the Russell's 18th Century series, she lives in South Texas with her family. Lynn's featured book is A Fallen Sparrow, a novel of the American Revolution. Next up, we have Becky Van Vleet. Becky is a retired teacher and principal and award-winning author. She and her husband make their home close to Colorado Springs, where she enjoys gardening, hiking, oil painting, power walking, and spending time with her family, especially reading books to her grandchildren. Becky has devoted her website to creating and preserving family memories and sharing family stories for the next generation through her blogs and newsletters. She loves to encourage others to do the same. You can find out more by visiting her website at beckyvanvleet.com. And Becky's featured book is Unintended Hero. And last up is Kathy Webster. Kathy finished an IT career at Trinity School of Midland, Texas, to return to her first love, classical music, in her writing. She holds a degree in music performance from the UNC School of the Arts, an MA in music history from the University of Missouri, and played clarinet with the Midland Odessa Symphony. She has been fascinated with the history of Moravian Church in Salem, North Carolina for years. The Amadeus Variations gave her a chance to talk as well about the life-changing, explosive love of God. Kathy and her husband of 36 years, George, attend Mid-Cities churches. Her featured book is the Amadeus Variations. Welcome to all of our authors, and thank you so much for spending time with the group tonight. I'm going to start with Crystal, and my first question is, and this is going to be for all of the authors so everybody can hear what they've got going on. Can you give our audience a brief overview of what your featured book is about?
So my book is about a Secret Service operative in the 1880s, back when they hunted counterfeiters. So they didn't actually protect the president until 1901. So they had like 40 years where they basically, their main job was to hunt counterfeiters. And so this is book 1 in the series. And I have an undercover operative who is very close to catching the lead ringleader in a counterfeiting gang, only to discover that his ex-fiance's family may be involved. And so he has to contend with that and the reason why he left her. So
Oh,
pretty much it.
that sounds exciting. I love that time period. Sarah, you're up next. Give us a little bit about your book.
Okay, Mercy's Legacy is book 3 in the Mercy series. So we have walked with these characters for the first 2 books, although you can read this as a standalone. But this is mainly the story of Mercy now, who was in her mom's belly in book 1. But in this book, she's 9 years old, and she is the product of rape. And she has questions about her birth father, who is now completely turned his life around. And we learned his story in book 2. So she, her brother takes her to go visit her birth father, unbeknownst to her mom. And she is on a journey to go learn who she is. And that also weaves in the past story of the mulatto enslaved woman that we got to know in book 1 and book 2. It's her daughter now, and we're in Reconstruction time. So that's these are split time books. So we have contemporary and we have historical. So the historical version, which is why you guys are all here, is that we have the slavery is over, right? But it's not really what they thought it was going to be. Freedom is not what they really thought it was going to be. And so after her brother almost gets lynched, Liberty's mom, Mercy, who we got to know in book 1 and book 2, her mom sends her away back to Georgetown, where she was from. And she makes this journey with somebody from the Freedmen's Bureau who is running away for his own reasons, and they kind of make this journey together. And she goes back to the plantation that Mercy was from, learns some family secrets, and kind of makes some restoration there. So that's that side of that story.
Very exciting. That sounds fascinating.
It was so much
Izzy,
fun
where
to
did
write.
you go? Oh, good. There's Miss Izzy. Okay, Izzy, you're up. Tell us something about your book.
Okay, Rita is a time travel romance. So this is what it looks like. And it's about a woman. She's a retired physician, and in present day, actually it's like 2019, and it's also the third in a series. The first is Max and the second is Garrett. And in the first one, Max travels from 1769, and this is happening in Yorktown, Virginia. So he travels, he's been trapped in time, and he is comes back in present time. So he's trapped in 1769, and he's trapped inside his conservatory. So he arrives in present day. And that book concerns Max and Olivia. And Olivia's grandmother is actually Rita. So Rita is 65. She's a retired physician, and she's been intrigued by Max's conservatory the entire time that he's been running around with Olivia and stuff. And so the reason she became a doctor was because of a diary that was passed down in her family from Josiah Jones, who was a physician in Gloucester in about 1769. So, and at that time, gosh, I forgot the name. Now cholera went through there, and cholera wasn't named at that time. They knew about it, but they didn't know what it was. So when Rita goes to medical school, she thinks she's figured out what killed the children that Josiah was trying to treat in the diary. So she has being a widow and being retired, and her life is sort of at loose ends, and she decides she's going to go back in time and see if she can save those children. And so, but she didn't count on that she would very much like Josiah, and that Josiah would very much like her as well. So that all, and then there's a happily ever after.
Thank you, Izzy. Okay, next up, Lynn, tell us about your book.
My book is the third in a series, the 18th century, and it's about, well, obviously the revolution, and there is a young woman who's a printer's daughter, and she has a conviction that it's not right to rebel against the king. And her, there's a distant relative who comes into town. Well, he's a Scots-Irish frontiersman. And this is where it connects to the other books, because he's one of the Russell family, which is the Shenandoah Valley family. And of course, he argues with her. Now, there's a third character that it's a third point of view character, and that is a British officer. And this was a great deal of fun to write, especially because one of the threads of this series has to do with the Great Awakening and the preaching of George Whitefield. And of course, you may know how the Methodist denomination kind of got started there too. So there are some prominent Methodists who are in England at this time. And so I kind of bring them in. I have the Earl of Dartmouth give my British character a job to be an observer in Boston. He goes undercover. And so he thinks, oh, this is terrible. It's rather dishonorable to be a spy. And so I just really enjoyed him and his whole character arc. And of course, the main heroine, and she has to wrestle with a lot of things during the war. And there's some grief and loss, because when I wrote this, I was kind of like, you know what, this is war. And they didn't know that they would win. How would you feel like thinking about, oh, we're just going to be under tyranny forever? And so they grapple with all that stuff. And so that was just really enjoyable to write.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, Becky. What? Becky, you can go ahead and tell us a little bit about your
Okay,
book,
yeah.
Unintended Hero.
Thank you, Tracy. As you shared in my introduction, I am a strong believer in telling our stories. And I feel like stories are transformational, they're powerful, and they should be passed down to the next generations and preserved in some fashion or form. And so a few years ago, I set out to write some children's books inspired on true stories in my family. And there was one story I just knew I really had to tell. And that is the story about my father in World War II. And so this is actually my first adult novel, and it was published in August. And so I just feel like it's really important that we preserve the World War II stories from the greatest generation, because I really feel like they set such a fine example for us with their bravery, their fortitude, their sacrifice, their patriotism, and they just have really powerful messages for our young people today. So I did not want to have my dad's story lost or just never remembered by anybody. So I set out to write it really for my family. And one thing grew to the next thing, and pretty soon I thought, I think I can actually turn this into a book. So my story starts out with my dad making that decision to enlist in the Navy at the age of 17. He was concertmaster of his high school orchestra, and he quit everything to go fight in World War II right after Pearl Harbor was bombed. And of course, we know that many boys did that. There were many teenage boys and young women as well who dropped everything for the cause of America and to fight for America. So I wrote his story. I wanted to write it clean. And by that, I think we all know that we've heard the expression, cussing like a sailor, and that sailors cussed, and I know these young boys did. But I did not include expletives in my book. I wanted to write it clean so that not only could adults enjoy it, but that it could be appropriate for high schoolers as well. And I felt like that's how my parents would want me to write the story. But I also did include, you know, the ugliness of war, the true facts of war with the kamikazes and what the war was really like in the South Pacific. My dad was on board the USS Denver, which was a light cruiser, and the ship was, without giving away spoilers, it was torpedoed. And I won't go beyond that, but I really felt like he had an amazing story that I really wanted to preserve for not just my family, but for others. And it came out in the form of a book.
That's really wonderful. And you're right, it needs to be done more. We need to be putting down our history for our future generations. I totally agree. Kathy, you're up next.
Okay. Well, my book is the Amadeus Variations. I don't know if it's going to focus very well.
Pull it back a little bit. If you pull your cover back, I think we can see it better. It's still a little blurry.
Oh, well, it's a little blurry. Anyway, it's a historical musical mystery. And there are actually two stories that intertwine. One is set in the current day, and there's a music history graduate student from UNC Chapel Hill. And she has a great aunt in Old Salem, North Carolina. It's part of Winston-Salem. And she goes to clear out the house after her aunt passes away. And she finds these trunks in the attic, and they're filled with old music. Of course, she's, you know, that's her field. So she starts researching to try to find out where they came from. And this Moravian church settled a community in Salem in the 1750s. And they were faith-filled, wonderful people. They would sell themselves into slavery to become missionaries to, you know, the Caribbean and stuff. They were also very, very musical. They all played instruments. They premiered Beethoven symphonies, and it was just a, you know, fabulously musical community. So the other story is set in 1791, and two men both kind of faced betrayal and broken hearts and a bad situation in Austria. So they start escaping from that, and they end up in Salem in 1792. So the two stories converge around this solving the mystery of what's in the attic.
Oh, very nice. A little mystery with music. I like that. Okay, so some of you have kind of touched on this, but I'm going to ask it anyways, and we can go through. What is the one thing that drew you to writing in the time period you've chosen to set your book in? And it's two parts. How did you decide on where to set your book? So we will start with Sarah.
Okay, repeat. Oh,
the question is, what is the one thing that drew you to writing in the time period that you've chosen? And how did you decide on where to set your book?
Okay. Gosh, I don't know. I with the series, I kind of jumped. I was in 1820 and then 1840s, and then in the 1880s. So I've kind of all through the 1800s. So what drew me to that time period, I'm not exactly sure. I was reading, I get a lot of ideas from the children's section of the library, because as you've heard in my bio, I have 8 children. So I spend a lot of time in that section of the library, and I get a lot of, you know, ideas there. And so I was reading it with my children in there, and we were coming across some books about the enslaved narratives of enslaved people. And so then I started just reading all of the slave narratives, just tons and tons and tons of them. And that's where Mercy's story in book 1 started. And so I kind of just started with her story and went on from there, because so much of just that history I never heard in school. And I wanted to really bring that to life. And so her story also went all around. I mean, she was in South Carolina, and then Kentucky, and Tennessee, and Louisiana and everything. And that also kind of just followed a lot of what I kind of learned in those narratives. And I love to travel and go to all of the places that I'm writing about. So it's also kind of like, ooh, where do I want to go? And when I get there, like, ooh, what's interesting around here? And what do I want to explore here? So I kind of like to write about places, you know, that I can actually visit and see and discover there.
Well, that's fascinating. I'm the same way. I like to go to travel to the places I'm writing about too. Crystal, same question. Do you want me to repeat it? Yes.
I got it. I think I got it. So my series takes place in the Gilded Age, and that's right after the Reconstruction, during the kind of the industrial, kind of all goes from like the 1870s up to about 1900. And it's a really complex era, and I really love it. Mark Twain is actually the one who coined the term Gilded Age, because on the surface, it all looked glamorous and pretty. I mean, you think of the Astors and all the food and the ball gowns and just all the extravagance. But if you scratched beneath the surface, there was a ton of unrest, labor riots, and just this really growing gap between the rich and the poor, and just lots of struggle. And I love the complexity of that sort of thing. So I will probably stick into the Gilded Age for a good long time.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, it fascinates me. And while I'll touch some on the kind of upper crust things, I actually like delving deeper into like the labor riots and the underbelly of the Gilded Age, so to speak. So I found my location actually so when I was researching for this series, I actually read stories put out by former Secret Service operatives in the early 1900s. And these stories were cases that they had done from like the 1870s to early 1880s. And Cincinnati was one of the top 5 counterfeiting areas. And Cincinnati is also where I happen to live, or right across the river. And at the time that I started the story, I had just moved to the area, and I really wanted to dive deep into the area I live and get to know them. And Cincinnati had 2 massive historic floods back to back, and it was the perfect setting for creating chaos for the story. So I like that.
Well, thank you. That sounds really cool too. I have to go like read all of these books now. Izzy.
There you go.
Yeah, show
Everyone was
your cover.
doing it, so now I've got it.
Yes, if you have your covers, definitely show your covers. That's what this is about. Izzy.
Yep.
You're up next. Do you need me to repeat the question? Because I know it was kind of long.
Yeah.
Okay, so what drew you to writing the time period, and how did you decide on where to set the book?
So there's multiple pieces that came to that. So I live in the coastal Virginia area. So I live a few minutes from Williamsburg and Yorktown and Gloucester. And so the streets that I drive on have been here since Revolutionary War times. They're there, and there was lots of Civil War history here too. Lots of things happened, in Virginia. And so I grew up really steeped in all this kind of history. And so I've always been interested in it. Actually, in my early 20s and 30s, I was really fascinated with Civil War history and read all that kind of stuff. And that sort of faded. And my daughter, my youngest daughter, I have twins. And so my youngest daughter is a twin. And when she finished high school, she joined the Coast Guard. And she did some training at the Coast Guard Training Center in Yorktown. So I had a reason to be in Yorktown. And one of the times I was walking through Yorktown by myself, and you pass Thomas Nelson's house. It's sitting right there on Main Street and Nelson Street. Didn't used to be. It was called Pearl Street at my time. But I was just walking down that road because I've had the idea that I was going to write something in the Revolutionary time period. The more that I look at it, the more that I understand that pop culture didn't really understand what America was like at that time at all. And the more I read about, women were working and there was all kinds of stuff going on that people really didn't know about, or still don't know a lot about. And I just So while I was walking down Main Street, while I was coming up Nelson Street, and Thomas Nelson's house was on my left, and I crossed around and I looked, and my imagination just took over, and it was like, and what would it be like if he was sitting there in his garden? What would he think of all of these people walking by in their blue jeans and all that stuff while he's sitting there in his formal gardens? And I just sort of stopped, and the whole thing just came to me. So, which never happens to me at all. So, but it did happen to me that time, and that's where Max came from. And so that's how this, but I've been writing, I have another series called The Shopkeeper's Widow, and that all of that takes place in the Norfolk area during that sort of time frame. I just fascinated with what the people could do and didn't do, and it all happened like right outside my yard out there.
See, you're supposed to be writing those books. That's very nice. Yeah. I always say write what you know, or write where you live, right? We all know what's in our backyard. So that's a good place to start. Kathy. Same questions.
Okay, I'm gonna try this again. You can see the
Oh,
book
that's
now.
better. Yes, yes. I like that color. It's
Well,
pretty.
I actually went to college in Winston-Salem at the UNC School of the Arts. And it's less than a mile from the Old Salem Restoration Area, the museum, the Home Moravian Church, and the big, they call their cemetery God's Acre. Their graves there from 1750. And then my sophomore year in college, I actually had been raised in an atheist family. And my sophomore year in college, I met the Lord. And whenever things got rough, I would go to Old Salem because I could walk there. And it was so beautiful, and it was just so peaceful. It's almost like the faith of those people soaked into those cobblestones and things. And I would just be restored, So I thought I really, really loved Old Salem. And then when I went to graduate school in music history, I discovered there was a woodwind ensemble composer who was a Moravian who had lived, 1780, 1820 or so in that village. So I got to do my research for my thesis there, and I got to be in the Moravian archives, which was they were wonderful. I mean, everybody wrote their life story, talking about stories. They all wrote their life stories, and they're in this vault. That's a huge treasure trove for, for more novels and things. So I just fell in love with that. I have so much respect for them, and I just love the place and the culture. And then, so it was that's my area of study for my degree, was that 1750 to 1820. So then I kind of came up with this idea of a composer I loved. There's a big hint, his name's in the title, his middle name's in the title. And so I just combined them into a story.
I so love that you can use what you did with your degrees, and you've kind of worked that into how, you're writing your fiction. So that is really nice too. Thank you. Lynn, same questions.
Okay. I noticed that there weren't really any books on the Great Awakening. I mean, there were a couple. I found a couple. I know somebody who wrote a juvenile version of something, and it was really good. So I thought, wow, I want to write in this time period, because I mean, how important is that? The Great Awakening, this huge revival in the 1730s and 40s. And I started thinking about how my story would go, and something that my daddy said to me kind of really probably triggered it. He told me about his ancestor, and this is family, oral tradition, that the first Basham came from Edinburgh, Scotland. He was a cabinet maker. Well, I found a grave. It doesn't say he was a cabinet maker, but this was passed down. And so I'm looking at these people, the Scottish, the Scots-Irish from Northern Ireland, who came over, and a lot of them settled in the Shenandoah Valley. And so when I ended up writing my story, my male protagonist was this frontiersman guy. And then he comes to Philadelphia for a new wife. And she's kind of a different tradition. She's a merchant's daughter. And so that was the first in the series. But when I wrote that, I was looking ahead. And I knew that the third in the series would be the Revolution. And I saw how, George Whitefield preached both sides of the Atlantic until 1770. That was his last sermon. And it so affected the colonies. And I thought, well, this is, from a theological worldview kind of analysis, this is really what made our country. So we had the gospel. And so, people will talk about things like John Locke or whatever, but the real bones of the country were affected more by men like George Whitefield and Samuel Rutherford, who wrote a treatise on government. And Sam Houston, Texas general, his name is Samuel Rutherford Houston, because those Scots-Irish in the Shenandoah Valley knew they treasured the ideas that came from these men. So I need to shut up, because that's
That's good.
I can get
Passionate about your work. And you should be. That's all wonderful stuff. No, you're passionate. That's a good thing. That's a
Yes.
good thing to be. Now, Becky, you were telling us how your story came to be, how your book came to be. But what I think we'd want to know is, how did your family, how did they react to this when you put this all together into a book?
Okay, well, Tracey, they were very excited. My husband and I are both baby boomers, and just as far as, it's an easy answer for how I came to write in the World War II era. And my main character is my father. That was a given. And I grew up hearing the stories from my father, and then my husband, also baby boomer. His father was a World War II fighter pilot in Europe, and we just both grew up in that, hearing those stories, and even really the Depression and things like that. So when we had our children, we felt like it was really important for them to hear those stories. And as long as our parents were living, we wanted them to hear those stories firsthand. But as our parents started passing away, we continued to share those stories. I did some homeschooling for a few years. And when it came time, to have lessons on World War II and the Depression and things like that, I was able to share these firsthand stories. I had actually recorded my father telling his stories on the USS Denver in 1990. That's just something that I did, not knowing I would write a book 30 years later, but I wanted to preserve his stories really for my children. So fast forward 30 years and I'm locked down in COVID. I've got the house to myself. My children are grown up. My grandchildren couldn't come over to visit. And I decided to start researching the USS Denver. And I started looking at all the deck logs and just doing all kinds of things that were fascinating about the USS Denver. So like I said earlier, one thing led to another. And I thought, I really think I can write a book with this. So when my adult children started hearing my vision and my dream, they were very excited. My sisters were excited, and I just, I kept it going. I had never written an adult book. I had experience in writing children's books, so I was on a pretty big learning curve, but by God's grace, I kept it going. I did get a lot of encouragement from my family.
Well, that's wonderful. And I think that's such a gift too. Do you think you're going to do another book?
That's a good question, Tracey. I want to. I love the World War II era. I really want to, but I just have to tell you that I don't have an idea at this time. I'm really just asking God to reveal to me what he wants me to write next.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you guys a little bit about your writing life, as in, tell us about your writing day. Are you a plotter? Are you somebody who just sits down and writes whatever comes into your head? Or do you have a plan? Do you write in the morning or in the afternoon? Do you have a playlist? I hear a lot of writers have playlists and special things that they do. So I'm going to start with Lynn this time.
I do not have a playlist. My brain doesn't work that well being distracted, right? You turn on music and I'll just listen to the music. So I have to get up in the morning and do it pretty early on. And I just try to write every day because I am not one of those productive writers. If I write 300 words, I'm happy because yeah, it's more than zero. So
That's true.
yes.
Totally
So,
get that.
yeah. And I'm kind of a hybrid between plotter and pantser. I have to have the, kind of some sort of structure so I know where I'm going. And then as I write, that's where the fun is, you discover things.
Yep, I agree. Get in the zone. That's right. Sarah, what about you?
I now have the privilege of, I get to write 3 days a week. So I don't write every day. I am an assistant preschool teacher 2 days a week. That was my former life before writing. I was a preschool teacher and children's ministry director and everything. So I was writing full-time 5 days a week. And I found out that I was too isolated. I'm kind of like on the line between introvert and extrovert. And I could not take just the being alone in my house 5 days a week. I couldn't take it. So I'm like, okay, I've got to be around people. So now I'm around little people 2 days a week. And then I write 3 days a week. And so I have my weekly goal is normally like 5,000 words a week. So if I can get that done, I'm good. The weekends are for my family. So I don't write that. So I wrote the first book in this series, Mercy Will Follow Me. I wrote that before I was a full-time writer. I wrote that on Saturdays only. That was when I had full-time day job and I would just go to the libraries on the weekend. So I think it can look like so many different things, when people say, if you're a writer, you have to write every day. Well, I definitely didn't. I've never have done that right every day, but I know it works for a lot of people, that's a discipline that works. Me, I need a chunk of time to actually, because it takes me, I think, like, a while to actually get into the flow to where I can actually get some words out. So if I don't have enough time, I can't actually do that. But I am a plotter. I am a reformed plotter because I never used to be. I used to hate that, but I found that it works so much better for me. And I've actually learned to love it. Like I was very resistant to the whole thought of it. But now that, I took like a class and I learned actually, okay, a method that works for me. And now I found that I love not having to go back and rewrite so much. And I love that my first draft is actually kind of decent. As opposed to when I was a pantser and it was a hot mess and I would have to go back and fix so many. I'm like, oh no, there's another hole. Okay, another plot hole right here. And I'd have to fix so much up. I really like actually spending the time in the front, making sure I got, my things covered so that when I'm actually writing, it is pretty decent. I still got some work to do, but it's a whole heck of a lot closer than it used to be when I was pantsing it. So
good. Crystal, what's your day like? Your writing day?
So I'm a caregiver, so it doesn't look the same every day. We're actually going through some family stuff right now, and so it really has no set. But if I'm having a good season, we are trying for me to be able to block out my day from like 10 o'clock in the morning to about 3 or 4, where I can work in the office. Now it's broken up, going and making food for the family or laundry and things like that. But I really try to focus, if things are going on with the family, I tend to end up focusing on administrative type things because my brain can handle that a little bit better. If I'm lucky, I can spend my time in the morning brainstorming a new story, and then afternoons editing. And if I'm writing a new story, right now I'm kind of in between projects. I do that in the brainstorming time. So that's kind of what it is. I steal it wherever I can get it.
I hear you. Yeah.
And I'm
You
trying
have
to
family
also build in
obligations.
rest.
Yeah. Yes,
So
that's true. Take care of ourselves too.
Yeah.
Kathy, what does your writing day look like?
Well, I kind of have 2 writing days, actually. When I did the Amadeus variations, I had retired. I'd actually written the book while I was working, like over 5 years. But then when I retired, I had time to really polish it and bring it together. And I just would work 3 or 4 hours a day, usually in the morning. Well, then this dear friend of mine, who is the executive director of a school called the Bynum School, talked to me. And it's a school for special needs children. Well, actually it goes up through adults. And they don't receive any government funding because they're a faith-based school and they needed a grant writer. And she said, well, you wrote a novel, you can be a grant writer. So actually there is a lot of overlap because I do have to be kind of creative and, selling this, and I have to do a lot of research. So I do that in the mornings. And then my goal is to write for at least a couple of hours in the afternoon. But sometimes I find that I am so written out. If I'm working on a big grant, it's just if I'm really focusing, but it's really good for me because I think I'm developing some discipline of writing whether you feel like it or not, because I have to be there doing that. So, but I do have a second book in this series, the outline, well, I call it an outline, it's like 40,000 words finished, and now I have to go back and put in like a lot of the historical details and smooth it out and all that fun editing stuff, which I have discovered is about 80% of the whole thing. But anyway, so that's where I'm at right now. And I want to get to the point where I don't get so burned out doing the grants in the morning that I can't, do the fun stuff.
Be creative. Yeah. It's a different part. It's a different type of writing. And you use a different part of your brain. I know people don't, some like, no, that doesn't happen that way, but really it does. Because business is business and creative is, you have to be in the flow. I think, I don't know. That's the way I feel about it. Izzy, what is your writing day like?
So like Crystal, my day, I have family obligations too, and I wind up my day changes a lot. But I have found that once I start doing administrative things, I have a really hard time switching back over to other things. So, back into the creative side. But I do try to I don't write every day either. I'm also not one of those people that writes a crappy first draft and goes back and fixes it. I can't stand that. So I make sure that my it's not polished so that it's done in the first draft, but it's pretty clean by the time I have the first draft done. And I do, I'm also a hybrid between plotting and
I'm getting feedback.
yeah, I don't know.
Can we have somebody mute? We need to have everybody mute. No, it's not yours.
Okay.
This was the same price.
Mark, can you mute, please?
But it's a lot more food.
Oh, really?
Not that we needed, I didn't have
No.
to upsize it.
Sorry, guys.
Tracey, you might be able to mute him if you're a host.
I don't think I am the host. Let me see.
Paige might be able to do it.
We just have a few more minutes left.
I have a question for you.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we gonna get any more Adirondack Pinkertons?
Oh, I don't know. I took that year off from writing because I had arm surgery. So I haven't decided yet. I think there's a third book.
That would be good.
Yeah.
There needs to be. I've been waiting. 2 is just it doesn't fit.
Yes, I'm sort of waiting.
See, I didn't know I had this fan base. So, does anybody like in our audience have questions? Because we're running down on time and I just didn't want to not do that. So if there's any questions, just post them over in the chat box and we'll pick them up. In the meantime, while you guys are all thinking of things that you need to know, I am going to ask if with the group, I'm looking at my last thing. Is there anything else you'd like our audience to know about you or your books? And they can be quirky things, quirky hobbies. Anybody? Nobody? Okay.
Tracey,
Yes.
I'll just speak up and say that if anyone in the audience or even my fellow authors, you know, if you know of any high schoolers or young people in your circle that likes World War II, and especially a true story, I'm not trying to just, you know, promote my book or make a sell, but I do feel like my book does have some good messages about patriotism and sacrifice and teamwork for America. And you know, I just think some of these messages need to get out to our young people today. So I thought I'd share that. And then Sarah, I just really appreciate just hearing about your writing day and your writing week, and that you can accomplish what you're doing with a young family. I think that's amazing.
Becky, is your book do you think your book is good for middle grade readers?
I think it could be. Like I said, I
Okay.
don't have any cussing in it. It does have some, you know, the history of the battles and that kind of a thing. But I feel like our young people they're hearing about that anyway. And it's certainly, I think, a lot tamer than a lot of the video games our kids are playing today. So I do have a cousin who, she's actually a second cousin, who has a 9-year-old son, and she said they were actually reading it out loud together.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Yeah, definitely. We can definitely plug your book with our groups. Great idea. Anybody else have anything they want to add on our final couple of minutes? Okay, should I ask my Halloween question? Because I had a silly question in here. I was like, okay, candy corn or Reese's Pieces? Anybody? No
Reese's.
candy? Reese's. Me too. I'm a Reese's.
Candy corn.
Yes. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, is anybody gonna say candy corn?
Me.
I like candy corn, but only if it's the kind made with the honey, you know, the good
Right,
honey like we
yes.
used to get when we were kids.
Yes, that's what I like. I
Only
wait
if it's
all year
not
long and I
stale.
buy it once.
Only if it's not stale too.
Yeah.
That
It
stuff
doesn't
is
get stale
too
here.
sweet.
Maybe I've never
Okay.
had any good honey candy corn.
Yeah, no. It's
You have to look
waxy,
for
it's
it.
sweet,
Yeah.
and weird.
Yep. Well, we are winding down and I want to thank you guys for participating.
Thank you.
Where's my page? Paige, do we have anything come up? Anything else we need to address? Oh, did we lose Paige?
I
No,
don't
she's over
see
there.
any questions that we missed.
Okay.
So I think we're good. If everyone's ready for me to stop the recording, I'll go ahead and do that.
And please, everybody that's listening, go back to the store on the website for this conference and check out everybody's books and check out their websites. And thank you all so much for coming to join us.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
Tracey.